nearly 4 years since the kidnapping and murder of Kaylee Sawyer. And today,
I really needed to see all parties
guilty to aggravated murder and the death of 23-year-old Kaylee Sawyer.
She walked out the door that Wednesday night with a bottle of wine, a phone in her pocket, and a route she had taken dozens of times before. Sarah had no reason to be afraid. She had every reason to believe she would be home before midnight. She never was. Her full name was Sarah Everard. She was 33 years old. She had warm eyes, a wide smile, and the kind of laugh that made other people want to laugh too. She was born in June 1987 in York, England, a city of cobblestone streets, cathedral spires, and the kind of quiet dignity that tends to shape thoughtful people. York was home. It was where her parents lived, where she grew up, where her roots ran deep. But London was where her life was unfolding, loud, ambitious, full of possibility. Her father, Jeremy, was a professor at the University of York. Her mother, Sue, worked in the charity sector. They were, by every account, a close and loving family. Sarah was the youngest of 3 siblings. Her sister Katie and her brother James were part of a household that clearly valued education, kindness, and community. Those values did not stay behind in York. Sarah carried them with her everywhere she went. She attended Fulford School in York before earning a place at Durham University in 2005, where she studied human geography at St. Cuthbert's College. She graduated in 2008 with a 2.1, a result that reflected not just intelligence, but genuine dedication. Geography is a subject that asks you to understand the world, how people move through it, how spaces are shaped by human behavior, how place and identity are inseparable. It suited her. Sarah was someone who paid attention to the world around her. After graduation, she made the move that thousands of ambitious young graduates make every year. She packed up her life and headed to London. The city swallowed her up in the best possible way. She found her footing in marketing, working her way up with quiet determination until she became an accounts manager. She was good at her job. She was professional, reliable, and well-liked by colleagues. Work was not just a paycheck for Sarah. It was part of how she engaged with the world. By early 2021, she had just taken an exciting new step. She had accepted a position at the Flipside Group, a company based in Holborn, central London. She told friends she was so excited to start this next chapter. Those words, so ordinary, so full of forward momentum, carry an unbearable weight now. But at the time, they were exactly what they sounded like. A young woman on the rise, looking ahead. She lived in Brixton, South London, in a flat just a few streets away from her boyfriend, Josh. Their relationship was close, comfortable, and grounded. They were the kind of couple who lived near enough to feel together but maintained their own spaces, a modern arrangement that suited both of them. Josh was, by every account, devoted to her. The proximity of their homes was not just convenient, it was deliberate. They wanted to be close. Sarah's friendships were deep and lasting. One of her close friends, Rose, had been on the same university course as her at Durham. Years after graduation, they were still meeting up, still talking, still showing up for each other. When Rose's mother passed away, it was Sarah who was there, thoughtful, present, never offering empty words when genuine comfort was needed. Rose would later tell the BBC, "She's really caring, thoughtful, and never has a bad word to say about anyone, ever." That final word, ever, says everything. She was not perfect, of course. No one is. But the imperfections that make a person human, small impatiences, occasional anxieties, the ordinary friction of navigating life in a big city during a global pandemic, were simply part of who she was. In early 2021, London was still locked down. The COVID-19 restrictions had changed the texture of daily life in ways that were exhausting and isolating. People were finding small ways to stay connected, to hold on to normalcy. A bottle of wine at a friend's house, a long phone call on the way home. These were the rituals that kept people going. Sarah was managing it the way most people were, imperfectly, but with resilience. She was active. She walked. She stayed in touch with the people she loved. She found meaning in her new job, in her relationship, in the friendships she had cultivated over years. She was, in the truest sense, simply living her life. On Wednesday, the 3rd of March, 2021, she made plans to visit her friend who lived on Leithwaite Road, on the outskirts of Clapham Common. Before heading over, she stopped at her local Sainsbury's to pick up a bottle of wine. It was the kind of small, generous gesture that defined her, arriving at a friend's door with something to share. Their evening together was warm and unremarkable in the best way. They caught up. They talked about lockdown, about the strange slowness of days that all blurred together. It was the kind of evening that feels forgettable in the moment but becomes precious in memory. At around 9 p.m., Sarah said goodbye and stepped out into the night. She had her phone. She had her headphones. She was wearing navy trousers with a diamond pattern, a green raincoat, orange and turquoise trainers, and a beanie hat. She chose to walk home rather than take public transport, a decision that made complete sense. The lockdown had made buses feel risky. She was an active person. The night air was a relief after a day spent mostly indoors, and this was a route she knew well, a well-lit route. A safe route, a route she had walked many times before. At 9:15 p.m., she was captured on CCTV at the Bowed Road Junction. She called Josh. They talked for around 15 minutes. Easy. An unhurried conversation between two people who were comfortable together. They made plans to meet up. Then at 9:28 p.m., she appeared on CCTV again, this time on Cavendish Road. She was less than a mile from home. She had every reason to believe she would make it. Somewhere between that last camera sighting and her front door, Sarah Everard disappeared. While Sarah was walking home through the quiet streets of South London, a man was already waiting. He had not chosen her specifically. He had chosen a type, a lone young woman walking at night, far enough from crowds to be vulnerable. Sarah simply had the devastating misfortune of being in the wrong place at the exact moment he decided to act. But the man who took her life did not become dangerous overnight. The road to that March evening had been building for years. Through warning signs ignored, complaints dismissed, and a system that failed to see what was standing right in front of it. His name was Wayne Couzens. He was 48 years old at the time of the crime. He was born and raised in Dover, Kent, a port town on the southeastern tip of England, facing the English Channel. Dover is a place defined by movement, by crossing, by departure. It is where people leave England and where they return. For Couzens, it would become the place he fled to after committing the most catastrophic act of his life. For over a decade, Couzens had worked in a family business in Dover. He was, on the surface, unremarkable. He was married. He had 2 young children. He had a dog. He lived in a house in a quiet part of Kent. To neighbors and casual acquaintances, he appeared to be exactly what he presented himself as: an ordinary family man with a steady job and no obvious darkness. This was perhaps the most chilling thing about him. The monster was thoroughly hidden behind the mundane. His path into law enforcement began with a role as a traffic officer before he joined the Civil Nuclear Constabulary, a specialist police force responsible for guarding nuclear sites across the United Kingdom. It was not a frontline force in the traditional sense. Officers did not respond to crimes in the community. They guarded perimeters. They carried firearms. The role gave Couzens something he would come to use as a weapon: authority, the weight of a uniform, the power of a warrant card, the public's instinctive trust in anyone wearing a badge. Well, he became an authorized firearms officer during this period. Trained, certified, and trusted with weapons that most police officers never carry. He also spent time as a reservist with the Princess of Wales's Royal Regiment, a territorial army unit. In 2018, he made the move that would ultimately place him in the path of Sarah Everard. He joined the Metropolitan Police Service, assigned to the Parliamentary, Baffling, and Diplomatic Protection Command, the unit responsible for guarding the Houses of Parliament and foreign embassies across London. It was, in theory, one of the most prestigious postings available to an officer of his rank. But the cracks had been there long before he ever joined the Metropolitan Police. In June 2015, a complaint was made that a man had been driving while naked from the waist down in Dover. Wayne Cousins was alleged to be that man. No arrest was made. The complaint was logged and apparently forgotten. It was not the first sign. It would not be the last. At the Civil Nuclear Constabulary, colleagues had given him a nickname. It was not a kind one. According to the Chief Inspector of Constabulary, Sir Tom Windsor, who later confirmed the detail on BBC Radio 4, Cousins had been referred to by some colleagues as the rapist. The nickname reportedly existed because he made female co-workers feel deeply uncomfortable and uneasy. It was a word chosen not randomly, not as dark humor, but as a warning, one that was never passed up the chain, never recorded in any formal way, never acted upon. A retired Metropolitan Police Sergeant with 30 years of experience, Graham Wetton, he later said, "I have never heard a nickname like that before. Why would you call somebody that?" In a police environment, it raises alarm bells. And yet those alarm bells were never rung loudly enough to stop what was coming. In the days and weeks before March 3rd, 2021, Cousins was not acting on impulse. The prosecution would later argue, with devastating clarity, that what he did to Sarah Everard was planned for at least a month in advance. He had reportedly spent time traveling to London to research how best to commit the crime. He was not looking for Sarah specifically. He was looking for anyone. A lone young woman he could isolate, control, and destroy. On February 10th, he logged onto Amazon and purchased a police standard issue handcuff key with a double locking pin for £2 and 49 pence. B. The prosecution argued this was bought deliberately to make a victim believe he was a serving officer acting in an official capacity. He was laying the groundwork with cold, methodical precision. Then, in what investigators would later identify as a deeply significant detail just 3 days before Sarah disappeared, Cousins allegedly exposed himself to a woman inside a McDonald's restaurant in London. A member of staff witnessed it, captured it on CCTV, and reported it to the Metropolitan Police. The report was made. It was received. And then, nothing. Cousins continued working as a police officer. He continued carrying his warrant card. He continued his preparations. On the afternoon of March 3rd, Cousins completed a shift that had run from 7 p.m. the previous evening until 7 a.m. He then drove to Dover. It East End, where he picked up a white Vauxhall Astra from a car hire company at 4:45 p.m. He used 2 mobile numbers when renting the vehicle, a detail that would later become a crucial thread investigators would pull to unravel everything. At 8 p.m. that same evening, CCTV cameras inside a Tesco in Kensington, West London, captured him purchasing a packet of hairbands. The prosecution's argument was unambiguous. The hairbands were bought as part of the planned kidnap, either for use in a sexual act or as restraints. He had the handcuff key, he had the hire car, he had his warrant card, and his police belt, which he reportedly wore even when off duty. He was, in every sense, ready. He drove through South London that night, hunting. The prosecution described it plainly. He was searching for a lone young female to kidnap and rape. He was not waiting for opportunity. He was creating it. And then, on a quiet stretch of road near Clapham, his headlights found Sarah Everard. Green raincoat, orange trainers, walking alone, less than a mile from home. He pulled over. He turned on his hazard lights, and he stepped out of the car. The night of March 3rd, 2021, was cold and quiet in South London. The city was under lockdown. Streets that would ordinarily hum with late-night foot traffic were largely empty. Pubs were closed. Restaurants were dark. The usual noise and movement that makes a city feel safe. The presence of other people, the sense that someone is always nearby, had been stripped away by a pandemic that had already taken so much. For a lone woman walking home after 9 o'clock, the emptiness of those streets was not abstract. It was felt in every step. Sarah had left her friend's house on Leithwaite Road at approximately 9 p.m. She was in good spirits. The evening had been warm and familiar. The kind of uncomplicated time spent with someone you have known for years, talking about nothing in particular and everything at once. She had said goodbye, stepped out into the night air, and begun her walk home to Brixton. The route was approximately 2.5 miles, a walk of around 50 minutes. She had done it before. She felt safe doing it. She had chosen a well-lit route deliberately. At 9:15 p.m., she was captured on CCTV at the Bowd Road junction. She was walking at a steady pace, phone in hand. She called Josh. They talked for around 15 minutes. Easy, relaxed conversation between two people who loved each other and were simply checking in. They made arrangements to meet up later. It was an ordinary call, the kind of call that happens 1,000 times a night between couples across a city. At the end of it, Sarah hung up and kept walking. 1 minute later, at 9:28 p.m., she appeared on CCTV on Cavendish Road. She was less than a mile from home. She had her headphones in. She was moving through the night the way millions of women move through cities every single day. With awareness, with purpose, and with the reasonable expectation that she would arrive safely at her own front door. She never appeared on camera again. What happened next was reconstructed by investigators with painstaking care over the weeks and months that followed. A female passenger in a car that drove past the scene would later tell police what she had witnessed. She saw Sarah standing at the side of the road with a man. She saw handcuffs. She saw Sarah with her head down, compliant, not struggling, not arguing. The prosecution would later explain why. Cousins had produced his warrant card and placed Sarah under a false arrest, claiming she had breached COVID-19 lockdown regulations by visiting a friend's home. Under the restrictions in place at that time, indoor contact with someone outside your support bubble was prohibited. Sarah had technically done exactly that. She was a law-abiding woman. She respected authority. She had no reason to believe the man standing before her in the darkness, holding official identification and a set of handcuffs, was anything other than what he claimed to be. She complied. She got into the back seat of the white Vauxhall Astra. Cousins put her seatbelt on. He got behind the wheel, and he drove. CCTV on North Military Road in Dover captured the car at 11:43 p.m., hours after Sarah had been taken. Cousins transferred her from the hire car into his own vehicle at this location. The prosecution argued that during the window between her abduction in London and his arrival in Dover, Cousins had driven to a wooded area called Sibley's, which he knew well, and that it was there, in a dark stretch of woodland, miles from her home, miles from anyone who could help her, that he raped Sarah Everard. She was 33 years old. She had done nothing wrong. She had simply walked home. After 1 a.m., Cousins drove back toward Dover. At 2:34 a.m., CCTV captured him at BP Dover South Services, where he bought soft drinks in a carrier bag. The prosecution believed that by this point, Sarah was already dead. She had been strangled, the cause of death later confirmed as compression of the neck, using his own police belt, The same belt he wore even when off duty. The same belt that was a symbol of the institution she had trusted enough to comply with. The following morning, Cousins returned the hire car at 8:30 a.m., having driven over 300 miles in it. 45 minutes later, he was captured on CCTV inside a Costa Coffee in Dover, buying a drink and a snack. Staff who were present later noted he appeared fidgety at the till. It was the only visible crack in his composure. At 11:05 a.m., he was seen in Dover purchasing a petrol can and filling it at a BP station. He also filled his own car's tank. Then he drove to a McDonald's for food. The petrol can, investigators would later determine, gas was used in an attempt to burn Sarah's body on the small piece of woodland off Frid Lane that he had purchased in 2019. A private, secluded plot in Kent called Hode's Wood. He had bought it years before the crime. Whether it was purchased with criminal intent, or whether it simply became useful is something only Cousins knows. He has never explained himself. The attempt to burn her body was not fully successful. He placed her remains into a builder's bag and submerged them in a pond within the woodland. He then threw her phone into a river in Sandwich. He believed he had erased her. Back in London, Thursday had come and gone with no word from Sarah. She had missed a meeting at work. Her colleagues assumed she was unwell. Josh had been calling and messaging throughout the day, growing increasingly uneasy with each unanswered attempt. Though by the evening, the unease had hardened into alarm. Just after 8 p.m. on Thursday, March 4th, Josh reported Sarah missing to the police. The investigation began. Officers began pulling CCTV footage, mapping her last known movements, tracing her phone signal. Her phone was switched off and had been since the night she disappeared. Messages were going unread. The footage from the estate agent's camera on the corner of her street confirmed what her family and Josh already feared in their bones. She had never made it home, not even close. Sarah's family drove down from York, her parents, her siblings. They arrived in London and threw themselves into the search with desperate energy, putting up posters, handing out flyers, knocking on doors. Her name began trending on social media. Thousands of strangers shared her photograph. 8 dash cam footage requests went out across South London. The response was enormous and immediate. A city collectively holding its breath, hoping. But somewhere in Kent, in a patch of private woodland, in a pond that no one yet knew to look at, the search was already over. When a person disappears in a city of 9 million people, the search can feel impossibly vast. Every street corner is a potential clue. Every face on a bus is a possible witness. Every camera mounted above a shop door is a thread that might, if pulled carefully enough, lead somewhere. The detectives who took on Sarah Everard's case understood this. They also understood something else. Something that sharpened the urgency of every hour that passed. Sarah was a responsible, grounded young woman with deep roots in her relationships and her work. She did not vanish. She was taken. And whoever had taken her might still have her. The investigation was led by Senior Investigating Officer Simon Harding. From the moment Josh reported Sarah missing on the evening of March 4th, Harding's team began the methodical, exhausting work of reconstructing her final known movements. CCTV footage was pulled from cameras across South London, from estate agents, bus routes, traffic systems, private businesses. Every frame was examined. Every timestamp was mapped. The footage told a story up to a point. It showed Sarah at the Bowd Road junction at 9:15 p.m. It showed her again on Cavendish Road at 9:28 p.m. And then it showed nothing. She simply ceased to appear. The camera on the corner of her own street confirmed she had never arrived home. The trail went cold less than a mile from her front door. On March 6th, and 3 days after her disappearance, police made the decision to release the CCTV footage publicly. Harding appealed directly to Londoners. Anyone with dashcam footage, anyone who had been driving through Clapham that night, anyone who remembered seeing anything unusual. The response was significant. Thousands of people checked their footage. Tips flooded in. And among them, something useful emerged. A piece of dash cam footage captured something that CCTV had missed. It showed Sarah standing at the side of the road with a man. Nearby was a white Vauxhall Astra with its hazard lights on. The footage was grainy but usable. Investigators examined it carefully. A second piece of dash cam footage captured at 9:38 p.m. showed the same car, this time with both front doors open. Someone had gotten in. The car had not yet moved. In the car was the key. Investigators ran the partial plate through automatic number plate recognition systems. The vast network of cameras embedded across UK roads that silently log vehicle movements around the clock. The system returned a result. The Vauxhall Astra had been captured on cameras beyond London, heading southeast toward Kent. It was a hire car. Investigators traced it to a car hire firm in Dover. When they arrived at the firm, staff handed over the rental agreement. It included a name and 2 mobile phone numbers. Detectives ran both numbers through the police database. One of them returned a result that stopped the room cold. The number was registered to a married father of 2, a serving Metropolitan Police officer, a firearms officer with the Parliamentary and Diplomatic Protection Command. His name was Wayne Couzens, and he was 48 years old. He lived in Deal, Kent. On the night of March 9th, police officers arrived at Couzens' home in Deal and placed him under arrest on suspicion of kidnap. They also arrested him in connection with a separate allegation of indecent exposure. A woman, later identified as his wife, was also arrested on suspicion of assisting an offender, though she was subsequently released on bail and faced no further action. She was, by all evidence, entirely blameless. Assistant Commissioner Nick F. Grave addressed the public that evening in a statement that acknowledged the gravity of what they had found. The fact that the arrested man is a serving Metropolitan Police officer is both shocking and deeply disturbing. It was for many people, even the moment the case shifted from a tragedy into something more complicated, a betrayal not just of Sarah, but of the public's fundamental trust in those sworn to protect them. Because there remained a small but urgent possibility that Sarah was still alive and being held somewhere, detectives were authorized to conduct an emergency interview without a solicitor present. The footage of that interview, portions of which became public, showed Couzens offering an elaborate and false account, claiming he had been coerced by a criminal gang, that he had been told to pick up girls, that a van had appeared behind him, that men had jumped out and taken the woman he had stopped. It was a fabrication, delivered with the practiced calm of a man who had spent years in uniform and understood how interviews worked. Investigators listened. They did not believe him. They kept digging. On March 10th, police began searching Hode's Wood, the private plot of woodland in Kent that records showed Couzens had purchased in 2019. Dog units were deployed. A police helicopter circled overhead. Derelict buildings were searched. Specialist officers moved through the trees, and at just before 5 p.m. that afternoon, 9 days after Sarah had walked out of her friend's front door, they found her. Human remains. Later confirmed through dental records to be those of Sarah Everard. Couzens was rearrested, this time on suspicion of murder. The evidence against him accumulated with devastating weight. A piece of a phone SIM card recovered from the woodland matched Sarah's device. A bloodstain in the rear passenger seat of his vehicle matched her DNA. Semen recovered from the same seat matched Couzens. Phone data placed him at Sibley's, the wooded area where the prosecution believed the rape occurred, during the critical window between Sarah's abduction and his arrival back in Dover. The petrol can purchase was on CCTV. The Amazon order for the handcuff key was in his account history. The hairband purchase at Tesco was on camera. Piece by piece, the prosecution assembled a case that was, in the end, irrefutable. On July 9, 2021, Wayne Couzens stood in court and entered a plea of guilty to the murder of Sarah Everard. He had already pleaded guilty to her kidnap and rape. There would be no trial. There would be no opportunity for his lawyers to cast doubt, to challenge witnesses, to introduce uncertainty. He admitted what he had done. Sarah's family were present in court. He, her mother, Susan, her father, Jeremy, her sister, Katie. They had traveled from York to sit in that courtroom and face the man who had taken their daughter, their sister, their future. They had prepared statements. They wanted him to hear them. They wanted him to understand, in whatever way he was capable of understanding, what he had destroyed. Susan told the court that Sarah had spent her last hours on earth with the very worst of humanity. She said her daughter had wanted to marry and become a mother. Dreams that had been cruelly ripped away. Jeremy said he thought about what had happened to Sarah every single day, and that Couzens had deliberately and with premeditation stopped his ability to protect his child. The most fundamental thing a parent believes they can do. Katie, overcome with emotion, described how Couzens had treated her sister like she meant nothing and thrown her away like rubbish. They asked him to look them in the eye. He did not. On September 30th, 2021, Lord Justice Fulford delivered the sentence. He described the murder as having been planned in all its unspeakably grim detail, noting that all that had been missing for Couzens was a victim. He said the seriousness of the case was exceptionally high. He imposed the harshest sentence available under English law, a whole life order. Wayne Couzens would never be eligible for parole. He would die in prison. The courtroom exhaled. After everything, the disappearance, the desperate search, the horrifying discovery, the months of legal process, there was at last a verdict that matched the weight of what had been done. Then when the sentence was handed down and Wayne Couzens was taken from the courtroom to begin the rest of his life behind bars, something shifted. Not immediately, not cleanly. Grief does not resolve itself on a courtroom schedule. But for many people, Sarah's family, her friends, the women who had laid flowers at the Clapham bandstand, the strangers who had shared her photograph in those desperate early days of March, the whole life order felt like the only possible answer to an impossible question. It did not bring her back. Nothing ever could. But it was, at minimum, an acknowledgement by the justice system that what had been done to Sarah Everard was not merely a crime. It was an atrocity. Sarah's family returned to York carrying a grief that has no endpoint. Her mother Susan, her father Jeremy, her sister Katie, and her brother James have largely chosen to grieve privately, away from the relentless attention of cameras and headlines. That choice deserves respect. What they said in that courtroom, however, those raw, unguarded statements delivered directly to the man who destroyed their family, will endure as a testament to who Sarah was and how deeply she was loved. Susan's words in particular carried a weight that went beyond the courtroom. She described her daughter as someone who had wanted to marry, who had wanted to become a mother, whose future had been deliberately and violently erased by a man motivated by nothing more than his own monstrous desires. Jeremy spoke of the permanent, unfixable nature of loss, the way a father's most basic instinct to protect his children had been rendered impossible forever. Katie described her sister as someone who had been treated like she meant nothing and discarded. Together, their words painted a portrait of a family shattered in a way that no sentence, however just, can repair. On May 22nd, 2021, Sarah's funeral was held at Heslington Church in York, the city where she had grown up, where her roots were deepest, where her family had gathered to say goodbye. Friends and family came together to honor her. and remember her as she truly was. Not as a headline, not as a symbol, but as a daughter, a sister, a friend, a woman who had loved and been loved in return. For the Metropolitan Police, the fallout from Sarah's case was seismic and prolonged. Commissioner Cressida Dick initially defended her force, then apologized, then found herself under pressure from every direction. Politicians, the public, the mayor of London. On February 10th, 2022, she announced her resignation, stating that Mayor Sadiq Khan had made clear he had lost confidence in her leadership. Khan said he was not satisfied with her response to demands for urgent and fundamental change within the force. Change needed to root out what he described as deep-seated racism, sexism, homophobia, bullying, discrimination, and misogyny. Dick's departure did not fix the Metropolitan Police. It could not. The problems that Sarah's case had exposed were not the product of one commissioner or one failed vetting process. They were structural, cultural, and decades in the making. 12 separate officers were investigated by the Independent Office for Police Conduct in connection with the case, some for sharing offensive material in group chats, and some for failing to act on complaints about cousins, some for the manner in which they handled the indecent exposure report made just days before Sarah disappeared. The investigation into how cousins had been able to pass vetting processes and move through 3 separate police forces while leaving a trail of complaints and concerns behind him continued long after his sentencing. The non-statutory inquiry launched to examine how cousins had been employed in spite of known behavioral concerns produced uncomfortable findings about a system more focused on filling roles than on filtering out dangerous individuals. When he joined the Parliamentary and Diplomatic Protection Command in February 2020, he had not completed the mandatory 2-year probationary period. Reports suggested the rush to recruit had been accelerated following the 2017 terrorist attacks in Paris. The need for bodies had, in practice, overridden the need for rigor. Sarah Everard paid for that failure with her life. In March 2022, Cousins was charged with 4 counts of indecent exposure from between January and February of 2021, just weeks before he abducted Sarah. He pleaded not guilty and requested a jury trial. In the same month, the High Court ruled that the Metropolitan Police had breached the human rights of those arrested at the vigil held in Sarah's memory, specifically their rights to freedom of speech and freedom of assembly. By August 2022, the Crown Prosecution Service confirmed that those who had been arrested at the vigil would face no prosecution, stating it was not in the public interest. And the people who had gathered to grieve her, to demand better, to simply stand together in the darkness of a March evening, had done nothing wrong. In July 2022, Cousin's appeal against his whole life order was dismissed by the Court of Appeal. The judges granted leave to appeal but upheld the sentence, confirming that while his case did not fall within the standard statutory criteria for a whole life order, the individual facts were exceptional enough to justify it. He remains to this day one of a very small number of individuals in England and Wales to have received a whole life order for the murder of a single person where terrorism was not a factor. It was, in that sense, a landmark. A legal acknowledgement that what he did existed in a category of horror beyond the ordinary boundaries of criminal sentencing. He is currently imprisoned at HMP Franklin in County Durham, a high-security prison that houses some of England's most dangerous offenders. He will not leave. That is not a comfort. It is simply the law doing what the law can do, which is never enough, and everyone knows it. The conversation that Sarah's case ignited did not die with the verdict. If anything, it deepened. Women across the United Kingdom used social media in the weeks following her disappearance to share their own stories of being followed home, of holding keys between their fingers, of packing flat shoes in their bags so they could run if necessary, of calculating routes based on lighting and foot traffic and the presence of other people. These were not dramatic stories. They were ordinary ones. That was precisely the point. The precautions Sarah's case brought to public attention were not exceptional measures taken by frightened women. They were routine. They were Tuesday. They were the background noise of being a woman moving through public space after dark. The charity fundraiser organized by Reclaim These Streets and the group that had planned the original vigil raised more than £500,000 for women's charities in the wake of Sarah's case. The Home Secretary announced a review of how existing laws addressed indecent exposure and sexual harassment. A survey launched to gather women's experiences of harassment and violence received more than 15,000 responses in its first 10 weeks alone. The conversation was happening. Whether it would translate into lasting structural change remained and remains an open question. To mark the first anniversary of her disappearance, a walk was organized by Urban Angels. Beginning at Clapham North Station and ending at the bandstand on Clapham Common, where the first vigil had been held and where flowers had been laid by strangers who had never met her, but felt her loss as something personal. The purpose of the walk, organizers said, was to give the community an opportunity to come together, to remember Sarah, and to remember all victims of gendered violence, to say collectively that their names matter, that their lives mattered. Sarah Everard mattered. She was a woman who moved through the world with warmth and purpose. She was the youngest child of a family who adored her. She was a friend who showed up in the hardest moments. She was a professional building a career she was excited about. She was a partner who called her boyfriend on the walk home just to talk. She was a person who bought wine to bring to a friend's house because that is what thoughtful people do. She was funny and caring and principled and alive, and she had every right to remain so. She was taken on a cold March night by a man who had been trusted with authority and used it as a weapon. She was taken because she trusted the institution he claimed to represent. She was taken because a system that should have identified him as dangerous had failed, repeatedly, to do so. None of that was her fault. None of it was ever her fault. The world she left behind is less generous without her in it. Her family carries a weight that will never fully lift. Her friends lost someone irreplaceable. And every woman who walks home alone at night, headphones in, phone in hand, route chosen for its lighting rather than its convenience, every one of them walks in a world that Sarah's case forced into an uncomfortable confrontation with itself. She deserved to make it home. Her name was Sarah Everard. She was simply trying to get home. The world owed her better than it gave her.